Willow Creek had always been the kind of town that seemed immune to tragedy. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was a place where people waved at strangers, children played safely in the streets until dusk, and neighbors knew one another by name. Life moved slowly here, predictable and comforting, and residents took pride in the town's sense of community. Families gathered for summer fairs in the Central Park, shops lined the main street like old friends, and local police had a reputation for dealing with minor incidents with calm efficiency. Violence was a foreign concept, almost unimaginable. That illusion of safety, however, would be shattered on a rainy October evening that began like any other. Emily Lawson had always been considered a bright light in Willow Creek. At 28, she was young but accomplished, admired by colleagues and students alike. She taught English at the local high school, known for her kindness and patience, and often stayed late to help students struggling with assignments. To her friends, she was warm and reliable. To her family, she was the glue that held them together. Her apartment, modest but cozy, reflected her personality, clean, organized, and filled with little touches that spoke to a gentle, thoughtful nature. The walls were adorned with framed quotes from her favorite authors, and a small bookshelf lined one corner, carefully curated with novels, poetry, and textbooks. On most evenings, the soft glow of her reading lamp could be seen through the window, a comforting presence to anyone passing by. On that fateful night, rain pelted the streets with relentless intensity, turning the roads slick and reflective, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. Inside her apartment, Emily was alone, preparing a late dinner after a long day at school. She had been expecting a quiet evening, perhaps to unwind with a cup of tea and a new book. But someone had other plans. The first person to realize something was wrong was her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a retired librarian who lived across the hall. She had noticed Emily's lights were still on past her usual hour, which was not entirely unusual, but what struck her as odd was the complete silence when she knocked. Normally, Emily would respond with a cheerful greeting, perhaps joking about being late with dinner. That night, there was nothing. A growing sense of unease prompted Mrs. Henderson to call the local police, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. Detective James Harrow was dispatched immediately. A man in his late 40s, Harrow had seen more crime than most in a city twice the size of Willow Creek, yet he had a soft spot for small-town cases, perhaps because they reminded him of simpler times before life became a constant blur of violence and statistics. As he drove through the rain-soaked streets, Harrow felt a chill that had little to do with the weather. Something about this call felt different, more agent, more personal. Upon entering Emily's apartment, Harrow was met with a scene that immediately set off alarms. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost oppressive. On the kitchen counter sat a half-finished cup of tea, steam still rising, as if Emily had been interrupted mid-thought. The room was orderly, and yet, the air carried an intangible tension, like a secret pressing against the walls. Then Harrow saw the body. Emily Lawson lay on the floor in the living room, her expression frozen in a mix of shock and fear. There were bruises along her arms and a faint trace of blood on her clothing, but there were no signs of a struggle beyond those subtle marks. Her death was sudden, precise, and chilling in its quietness. Next to her, on the polished wooden floor, was a small piece of paper. Harrow picked it up carefully, his eyes narrowing. In neat, deliberate handwriting were the words, "You shouldn't have trusted me." There were no fingerprints on the note, and it was unclear if it had been placed there before or after her death. The cryptic message was the only clue in a room otherwise devoid of answers. The initial investigation began with standard procedure: interviews, canvassing neighbors, and scouring the apartment for evidence. But every question led to dead ends. Emily had no known enemies. Her colleagues spoke only of her dedication and kindness. Her family described her as thoughtful, caring, and careful. Even casual acquaintances offered nothing suspicious. There was no money missing, no signs of forced entry, and nothing stolen from the apartment. The murder seemed almost ritualistic in its simplicity, leaving investigators frustrated and the town horrified. As news of Emily's death spread, Willow Creek collectively held its breath. Parents kept children closer at home, friends spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy, and the local coffee shops were filled with whispers of disbelief. How could something so horrific happen in a place that prided itself on safety? How could someone commit murder with no apparent motive and leave a town reeling from shock? Rumors began to circulate. Some believed it was a crime of passion, that Emily had unknowingly rejected someone dangerous. Others whispered about a stranger in town, a traveler passing through, perhaps drawn to Willow Creek by its seeming peace. Yet no evidence supported any of these theories. Harrow, for his part, combed through every detail. He returned to the apartment multiple times, scrutinizing even the smallest elements, the placement of furniture, the locks on the doors, the way the blinds were drawn. Each visit left him more puzzled. He reviewed photographs of the scene, interviewed people Emily had interacted with that day, and retraced her movements. Every lead seemed to vanish before it could solidify. The note, the solitary clue, remained a mystery, tantalizing yet frustratingly unhelpful. In the midst of this chaos, Emily's family struggled to understand what had happened. Her parents alternated between disbelief and grief, unable to reconcile the image of their kind, gentle daughter with the violent act that had ended her life. Tom Lawson, Emily's younger brother, tried to piece together any memory that could help, recalling every conversation, every detail that might indicate a threat. Yet even he felt powerless, haunted by the question, why Emily? As the days turned into weeks, the investigation seemed to stall. Detectives followed leads that led nowhere, neighbors reported sightings that couldn't be verified, and the town's anxiety grew. Willow Creek, once serene and predictable, was now shadowed by Faye. Everyone wondered if the killer was still among them, quietly watching, waiting, blending seamlessly into their small, unsuspecting community. Despite the growing frustration, Harrow refused to give up. He believed that there was always a pattern, a clue hidden beneath the surface, no matter how well the perpetrator thought they had covered their tracks. The murder was cold, precise, and deliberate, which meant the killer had to know the victim well, or at least know how to manipulate circumstances to their advantage. Harrow kept returning to the note, reading it over and over, trying to understand its meaning. Who had Emily trusted, and why had that trust led to her death? The people of Willow Creek slept less easily, walked more cautiously, and eyed each other with suspicion. For the first time in decades, the town realized that safety was not guaranteed, and while the police worked tirelessly, there was an unspoken understanding that the resolution of Emily Lawson's murder would not just bring justice, it would also restore the town's shaken sense of security. As Chapter 1 closes, the stage is set. Willow Creek is a town on edge. A murder has left a family devastated, and Detective Harrow is determined to find the truth. The murder of Emily Lawson is not just a crime. It is a mystery that will challenge every assumption, test every instinct, and eventually reveal that sometimes, answers come from the most unexpected places. 3 months had passed since Emily Lawson's murder, yet Willow Creek remained haunted by her absence. The investigation had stalled, leaving the town suspended in a state of quiet fear. Families whispered behind closed doors, neighbors exchanged wary glances, and Detective James Harrow spent long hours revisiting every scrap of evidence, retracing Emily's final steps, and questioning anyone who might have seen or known something. Despite his years of experience, he had yet to uncover a single lead that pointed to a suspect. The case was colder than the midwinter streets outside, and the community's patience and faith in justice was wearing thin. Among those most affected by Emily's death was a younger brother, Tom Lawson. 24, practical, and level-headed, Tom had always been someone who trusted facts over feelings. He was the kind of man who kept a meticulous journal, organized his apartment down to the last book and pen, and preferred tangible evidence over speculation. Yet despite his rational nature, Emily's death had left him restless, haunted, and sleepless. He replayed every moment he had spent with her in his mind, searching for something he might have missed, some detail that could point to the person responsible. It was during one of these restless nights that something extraordinary happened. Tom awoke from a dream that felt more like a memory than a figment of imagination. In this dream, he was standing inside Emily's apartment. The room was bathed in a soft, golden light, though outside, rain poured heavily, as it had on the night she died. Every detail was sharp and vivid, the arrangement of the furniture, the small bookshelf in the corner, even the faint scent of lavender from Emily's diffuser. He had never been inside the apartment at that hour, Yet every detail felt intimately familiar, as though he had walked through this precise moment countless times. In the dream, a figure appeared. The person was cloaked in a dark hoodie, their face obscured by shadow. In their hands, they carried a small box, the edges worn and scratched. Tom felt an inexplicable pull toward the figure, a compulsion that seemed beyond his control. In the dream, he moved toward the kitchen cabinet, guided by an invisible force, and opened it. Inside the cabinet was a gold locket, gleaming despite the dim light, and engraved on it were the initials MT. Tom woke up with a start, sweat soaking his pajamas and heart pounding like a drum. At first, he dismissed the dream as a byproduct of grief, stress, and obsession. Dreams were not evidence, after all, and yet something about this one gnawed at him. He could still see the locket in his mind, feel the weight of it in his hand, and remember the strange sense of urgency, as if Emily herself had guided him to this discovery. For the first time since her death, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the dream was more than just a subconscious trick. It might be a message, a clue left for him when nothing else seemed possible. The next morning, Tom called Detective Harrow. He described the dream in painstaking detail, the layout of the apartment, the location of objects, the appearance of the figure, and, most importantly, the locket. Harrow listened quietly, skeptical but patient. "Dreams aren't evidence," he said finally, his voice measured. "But if you saw something specific, something you've never seen before, then maybe it's worth checking." Tom agreed. He returned to Emily's apartment with Harrow, who had permission to conduct a secondary search. They moved carefully, opening cabinets, checking drawers, and inspecting the small, intimate spaces that often go unnoticed. Hours passed with no significant findings, but Harrow's instincts told him to keep looking. There was a quiet tension in the air, the kind that only comes when something important is just beyond reach. Then, in the kitchen cabinet, tucked behind neatly stacked plates, they found it. A small box, its edges worn, the gold locket inside gleaming faintly. The discovery sent a shiver through both men. The locket was exactly as Tom had described in his dream. The initials MT were engraved on its surface, and despite the time that had passed, there were traces of blood smudged along its edges. This was not a coincidence, Harrow realized. Someone had tried to hide a clue, yet fate, or something beyond it, had guided Tom directly to it. The detective's mind raced with possibilities. Dreams were unreliable guides, yet here was physical evidence, undeniable and concrete, waiting to be examined. For Tom, the moment was surreal. Holding the locket in his hand, he felt a strange connection, as if Emily's presence was hovering just beyond perception. He thought of the last time he had seen her, the last conversation they had shared, and wondered if she had somehow known that her brother would need guidance to uncover the truth. The idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence before him was indisputable. Something, dream, intuition, or something else entirely, had pointed the way. Detective Harrow began investigating the locket immediately. He traced its origin, asking friends, family, and colleagues if they recognized it. It had been a gift Emily had received years earlier, but it now seemed to hold a dark significance. The initials, MT, could point to anyone in Emily's past. Harrow compiled a list of people who had these initials, focusing first on individuals close to Emily, former classmates, colleagues, acquaintances, and even a few people rumored to have had disagreements with her in the past. The investigation led them first to Mark Tyndall, a man who had dated Emily briefly during college. Mark had always been polite and respectful, and on the surface, there was no reason to suspect him of murder. When Harrow and Tom questioned him, he claimed to have no knowledge of the locket being anywhere near Emily recently. Mark insisted he had left it behind as a gift years ago, and he was visibly shaken by the implications. Yet, the initials matched, and the locket had now become a tangible connection to someone who had once shared a personal bond with Emily. While Mark's involvement seemed tenuous, Harrow could not dismiss the possibility entirely. He collected fingerprints from the locket and the box, ran background checks, and began cross-referencing alibis. Each inquiry revealed nothing criminal, yet every answer seemed to deepen the mystery. Why had the locket been hidden in the cabinet? Who had placed it there? And why now? Harrow understood that the case was entering uncharted territory, where intuition and subconscious memory might prove as crucial as physical evidence. Meanwhile, Tom could not stop thinking about the dream. Every detail had been precise. The way the light fell across the room, the exact placement of the dishes in the cabinet, even the scratches on the kitchen floor he had never noticed before. It was as if Emily's presence had guided him step by step. He began keeping a journal, documenting every element of the dream, every sensation, every fleeting thought. He theorized that perhaps his mind had pieced together fragments of things he had seen or overheard and transformed them into a vivid narrative. But no rational explanation could account for the uncanny accuracy of his recollections. The dream also affected Tom emotionally. For months, he had felt helpless, trapped by grief and frustration. Now, there was direction, a glimmer of purpose. He was no longer merely a brother mourning a sister. He was part of the investigation, an active participant guided by instincts that went beyond reason. His involvement added a new layer to the investigation, bridging the gap between physical evidence and human intuition. As the weeks progressed, the locket became a focal point of the case. Harrow interviewed more of Emily's friends and acquaintances, asking if anyone had ever noticed strange behavior, threats, or attempts to intimidate her. Patterns began to emerge. Several friends recalled Emily being cautious, speaking vaguely about someone from her past who had unsettled her. Emails recovered from her account hinted at tension with a person whose initials were MT. The clues were subtle, almost imperceptible, but combined with Tom's dream, they created a framework for understanding the mystery. Harrow began to consider a new theory. The dream had not been a mere coincidence. Perhaps it was a psychological manifestation of Tom's subconscious noticing things he had previously ignored, small details from conversations, observations, and images that his mind had stored. Or, if one allowed for the inexplicable, perhaps it was something more, something beyond the ordinary, a message from Emily herself. Either way, the dream had provided a breakthrough that months of traditional investigation had not. By the end of the chapter, the investigation had shifted in a dramatic way. The discovery of the locket in the exact location described in Tom's dream had reopened the case with renewed vigor. Willow Creek buzzed quietly with speculation, as townspeople whispered about the mysterious circumstances surrounding Emily's death. The police were no longer searching blindly. They had a new lead, a tangible object that connected the victim, the suspect, and the past in a way that demanded attention. In this chapter, the story becomes about more than evidence or suspects. It becomes about trust, intuition, and the strange ways in which truth can reveal itself. The dream had provided clarity in the midst of chaos, a beacon in the dark, and a reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are not found in plain sight. They are glimpsed through the veil of memory, subconscious, or perhaps something beyond the physical world. And so, as Willow Creek continued to reel from Emily's murder, a new chapter in the investigation had begun, one that would lead Detective Harrow and Tom Lawson down paths they could never have anticipated, where danger, deception, and revelation awaited at every turn. The dream had changed everything, but it was only the beginning. The discovery of the locket had sent shockwaves through the investigation. What had once seemed a cold, unsolvable case was now pulsing with new possibilities. Detective James Harrow, meticulous and relentless, knew the breakthrough could be the key to cracking the murder, but he also understood the danger in jumping to conclusions. Dreams were not evidence in a courtroom, and while Tom Lawson's account had guided them to the locket, it did not automatically identify the killer. Every step forward had to be deliberate, every suspicion carefully verified. The initials on the locket, MT, were the first lead Harrow pursued. He began with Mark Tyndall, Emily's former college boyfriend. Mark was polite, cooperative, and visibly shaken by the renewed focus on the investigation. He recalled giving Emily the locket years before as a token of affection, a small symbol of their fleeting romance. Harrow questioned him thoroughly, pressing on his whereabouts on the night of the murder, but Mark insisted he had been at home, alone, watching television, with no witnesses to corroborate his story. He was careful, calm, and adamant that he had no reason to harm Emily. Despite Mark's demeanor, Harrow knew appearances could be deceiving. People often hid their darkest impulses behind smiles and politeness. He reviewed Mark's past, his relationships, and his employment history, searching for anything that could suggest a motive. Nothing emerged. He even revisited the apartment, studying the crime scene once more, examining scratches in the wood floor, the angle of the furniture, the placement of objects. Harrow tried to imagine how someone could commit the murder so efficiently, leaving almost no trace. It seemed premeditated, calculated, and deliberate. The killer had clearly known Emily's routines, knew how to manipulate her environment, and had chosen the moment with care. As Harrow pursued Mark, other possibilities began to emerge. The initial report from the crime scene noted a figure in a dark hoodie, someone whose face was hidden and whose identity was unknown. Security footage from a nearby convenience store, collected after the locket discovery, revealed a shadowy person walking past just hours before Emily's body was found. The figure's movements were deliberate, almost casual, yet there was a tension in the way they held themselves. The video was grainy, the face obscured, but the height and build appeared consistent with Mark Tyndall. It was the first concrete visual connection between him and the scene, but it was far from conclusive. Harrow recognized the risk of being misled by circumstantial evidence. Someone could easily have staged the scene to frame Mark. While investigating Mark, Harrow received a tip from one of Emily's close friends, Lila Reynolds. Lila was articulate, observant, and fiercely loyal to Emily. She hesitated before speaking, glancing around as though the walls themselves might have ears. She revealed that Emily had been acting strangely in the weeks before her death. She had become secretive, anxious, and innumerably cautious about whom she trusted. Lila handed Harrow a folder of emails and notes Emily had saved on her computer. The messages revealed Emily had been quietly investigating something that she had not shared with anyone outside her closest circle. Emily's notes described irregularities in a local charity where she volunteered. Donations had been misappropriated, and Emily had discovered evidence suggesting that someone in a position of authority was siphoning funds for personal gain. The more Harrow read, the clearer it became that Emily had stumbled upon something much larger than a simple dispute. The initials MT appeared repeatedly in Emily's notes and emails, but this time, they did not point to Mark Tyndall. Instead, they belonged to Matthew Turner, a respected town councilman who had always maintained a pristine public image. Harrow felt a chill run down his spine. Turner was influential, connected, and well-regarded in the community. He had presided over committees, attended town meetings, and even participated in local charity events. To the public, he was impeccable, but Emily's notes suggested a hidden side, a secret that could ruin him if revealed. Harrow realized that Turner had both motive and means. He had everything to gain by silencing Emily. The puzzle pieces began to fit together, but Harrow knew he had to proceed with caution. Confronting someone of Turner's stature without solid proof could backfire, jeopardizing the investigation entirely. Harrow decided to dig deeper. He obtained financial records, examined bank transactions, and cross-checked them against Emily's notes. The discrepancies were startling. Large sums of money had disappeared from the charity's accounts at precisely the times Emily had noted in her emails. Turner's signature appeared on several of the authorization forms, suggesting he had access and oversight. Harrow could feel the tension building. He was now on the brink of exposing a killer hiding behind a veneer of respectability. Meanwhile, Tom continued to grapple with the meaning of his dream. Each day brought a mix of hope and dread. He would lie awake at night, recalling every detail: the light in the apartment, the figure in the hoodie, the small box in the kitchen cabinet. He wondered how his subconscious mind had created such a precise map of events. Was it coincidence, intuition, or something else entirely? The emotional weight of Emily's death and the clarity of the dream weighed heavily on him. Yet he felt compelled to follow its guidance, even as fear and doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Back at the police station, Harrow convened a team of forensic experts to examine the locket, the box, and any other trace evidence found at Emily's apartment. They discovered fingerprints inside the cabinet where the box had been stored, prints that did not match Mark Tyndall. Further testing revealed faint fibers on the hoodie found in the security footage, fibers consistent with clothing Turner had been known to wear in public appearances. Each new finding strengthened the case, narrowing the focus from the former boyfriend to someone far more dangerous and connected. The investigation into Turner was delicate. Harrow arranged for discreet surveillance, monitoring his movements, phone calls, and interactions. Turner continued to act as though nothing were amiss, attending meetings and public events with the same confidence he had always displayed. Yet behind the polished demeanor was a man increasingly aware of the tightening net around him. Harrow suspected Turner knew someone was closing in, and the longer he remained at large, the more dangerous he became. As the net closed, another layer of the story emerged. Interviews with other volunteers at the charity revealed that Turner had been intimidating anyone who asked questions about finances. Witnesses described hushed conversations, veiled threats, and subtle pressures to ignore discrepancies. Emily had been determined, meticulous, and unwilling to let the truth go unspoken. Her courage had marked her in Turner's eyes as a threat, and he had taken decisive action to remove that threat. Harrow realized that Emily's murder was not just about silencing her. It was a calculated move to maintain power, reputation, and control. But the investigation still faced challenges. Turner had carefully avoided leaving obvious evidence. The security footage was blurry, the fingerprints in the apartment were minimal, and his alibi for the night of the murder was shaky but difficult to disprove. Harrow had to rely on intuition, deduction, and a meticulous piecing together of events. He revisited Tom's dream and began to consider its significance not just as a guide, but as a framework for understanding how the crime had been executed. In the dream, the figure had carried the box, the very object now linked to Turner. Every element seemed to point toward the councilman, yet legal proof was still required to bring charges. Meanwhile, the community of Willow Creek watched with growing tension. Rumors swirled, speculation ran rampant, and the once tranquil town found itself under the shadow of suspicion. People began to question their neighbors, their friends, and even their local leaders. The idea that someone as trusted as a councilman could commit murder was almost unimaginable. Harrow knew that the revelation of Turner's potential guilt would shock the town, and he had to be certain before exposing it. Harrow decided to confront Mark Tyndall one last time. Though he no longer appeared to be the primary suspect, Mark's cooperation remained essential. When confronted with the new evidence pointing to Turner, Mark was shocked, insisting he had no knowledge of the locket being used to mislead the investigation. His shock was genuine, Harrow noted, and it served to further clear him in the eyes of the law. With Mark now effectively removed from suspicion, the focus could shift entirely to Turner. The turning point came when forensic analysis confirmed the fingerprints on the box belonged to Turner. The fibers on the hoodie were consistent with clothing he owned, and the timeline aligned perfectly with his opportunity to commit the crime. Harrow now had more than circumstantial evidence. He had a tangible, forensic connection linking Turner to Emily's murder. The final piece was a phone record showing Turner had been near Emily's apartment on the night of her death, contradicting his alibi. Each revelation brought them closer to justice, yet the detective knew that arresting a man of Turner's stature would require careful planning. As the chapter drew to a close, Harrow prepared for the confrontation that could finally end the months of fear, grief, and uncertainty. He briefed his team, reviewed evidence meticulously, and mapped out every potential risk. The investigation that had begun with a cryptic note and a tragic death had evolved into a tense battle between justice and deception. The dream that had guided Tom Lawson had uncovered the locket. The locket had revealed Turner, and Turner's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. Yet questions remained. How had Turner managed to frame Mark initially? Was there more to the crime than met the eye? And, most importantly, could justice be delivered before Turner had the chance to cover his tracks further? For Tom, the answers were now within reach, but they came at the cost of confronting the unsettling reality that someone they trusted, someone they admired, had committed an unthinkable act. The town of Willow Creek held its breath as the pieces fell into place. Emily's courage, Tom's dream, and Harrow's relentless pursuit of the truth had illuminated the path forward. The murderer was no longer a shadowy figure, no longer a mystery that haunted the town's quiet streets. The killer had a name, a motive, and a history of deception. But the final confrontation, the moment when the truth would finally emerge fully into the light, was still to come. In uncovering the secret behind Emily Lawson's death, the story had grown from tragedy into revelation, from fear into determination. And as Harrow and Tom prepared for the next steps, one truth became clear. Justice was no longer a hope, it was a certainty, as long as they could navigate the final twists and dangers that awaited in the shadowed corners of Willow Creek. The revelation that the locket did not belong to Mark Tyndall but instead pointed to Matthew Turner sent ripples of shock through Detective Harrow and Tom Lawson. Turner, a man whose name had long been associated with respectability, leadership, and trust, now occupied a space in the investigation that made everything feel heavier, darker, The juxtaposition was chilling. How could someone so esteemed in the community, someone who had always appeared so above suspicion, be capable of murder? The very thought unsettled everyone involved. Harrow understood the danger that came with pursuing Turner. This was not just a criminal investigation. It was a confrontation with a man who had power, influence, and the means to manipulate perception. Harrow began by examining Turner's connection to Emily Lawson in detail. At first glance, their interactions appeared minimal, limited mostly to community events and public charity meetings. But Emily had a meticulous habit of recording everything she found suspicious, and in her emails, she had chronicled small, subtle incidents, donations disappearing from the charity's accounts, unexplained withdrawals, and veiled threats directed at those who asked questions. It was clear that Emily had stumbled onto Turner's secret, and that her discoveries had placed her directly in harm's way. Tom Lawson, meanwhile, continued to process the weight of the dream that had led them to the locket. Each detail of that night, the figure in the hoodie, the box in the kitchen, the initials engraved on the locket, had pointed them to Turner in ways that felt almost impossible. Tom had begun to wonder if Emily had somehow reached beyond the grave, guiding him to uncover what he otherwise could not see. Though Harrow dismissed the supernatural angle in practical terms, he could not ignore the undeniable accuracy of Tom's account. Dreams or intuition aside, it had provided them the breakthrough that months of traditional investigation had failed to uncover. With Turner now under suspicion, Harrow knew he had to proceed carefully. Arresting a man of Turner's standing required precision, patience, and irrefutable evidence. He assembled a team to conduct discreet surveillance, keeping track of Turner's movements, phone calls, and meetings. They observed him closely, noting how carefully he maintained appearances. Turner attended charity events, town council meetings, and public ceremonies with practiced charm, the kind that reassured the community and diverted suspicion. But beneath the polished exterior, subtle cracks began to appear. Harrow noticed the occasional flicker of anxiety in Turner's eyes, a hesitation when questioned about Emily or the charity finances. The detective understood that the smallest slip could expose the truth if documented correctly. The locket remained the most critical piece of evidence. Forensic experts had confirmed that fingerprints found on the box inside Emily's apartment matched Turner's. Fibers on the hoodie captured in security footage corresponded to clothing Turner owned, and the timeline of the footage aligned with his opportunity to commit the crime. Yet Harrow needed more than forensic evidence. He needed context, a motive, and a direct connection between Turner and Emily on the night she died. The investigation required careful piecing together of events, and every small detail became a crucial part of the puzzle. Harrow returned to interviews with Emily's friends and colleagues, asking about any interaction that might shed light on Turner's behavior. Lila Reynolds, Emily's best friend, revealed that Emily had grown increasingly anxious in the weeks before her death. She had mentioned a man in a position of authority who had unsettled her, someone whose charm masked a dangerous nature. Emily had confided in Lila that she feared her discoveries might put her in danger, but she was determined to document the truth regardless. Harrow realized that Emily's meticulous planning, her courage, and her instinct for detail had created the breadcrumbs that now led to Turner. Harrow also discovered that Turner had attempted to manipulate the investigation early on. Mark Tyndall had been unknowingly framed. The placement of the locket in the kitchen cabinet and Turner's use of a hoodie similar to the one in security footage were deliberate acts meant to mislead investigators. Turner had anticipated that suspicion would fall on someone with a past connection to Emily, and he had calculated that the small details would distract attention from himself. The more Harrow uncovered, the more he understood the level of premeditation involved. This was not a crime of impulse. It was a carefully orchestrated plan executed with precision. Financial records added another layer of evidence. Harrow obtained copies of transactions from the charity, revealing that Turner had accessed substantial sums of money at the same time Emily had documented discrepancies. Turner's signature appeared repeatedly on authorization forms for withdrawals, and while many transactions were coded or masked to appear legitimate, forensic accountants confirmed that funds had been diverted for personal use. Emily had recognized this pattern, and it had put her squarely in the line of danger. Harrow realized that Turner's motive was not just to silence her but to prevent the exposure of financial crimes that could destroy his reputation, career, and public standing. In addition to financial motives, psychological evidence began to emerge. Witnesses recalled subtle but consistent intimidation from Turner toward those who asked questions about the charity. Volunteers spoke of hushed warnings, veiled threats, and the careful manipulation of information to maintain control. Turner had cultivated an image of benevolence, but behind that image was a man capable of calculated violence to protect his interests. Harrow began to see a pattern of control, fear, and elimination of threats that fit the profile of someone who could commit murder while maintaining a facade of respectability. The challenge, however, was convincing the public and the legal system. Turner was beloved in Willow Creek, known for his charitable work and leadership. Accusing him of murder based on circumstantial evidence alone could spark outrage, disbelief, and pushback. Harrow knew he needed irrefutable proof, a moment where Turner's actions could no longer be denied or rationalized. The breakthrough came in revisiting the apartment once more, this time with a focus on small, overlooked details. Harrow's team re-examined the placement of objects in Emily's apartment. The scratches on the floor, previously considered incidental, revealed a pattern consistent with the movement of the box. Small fibers found on the locket matched materials from Turner's clothing and office environment. These seemingly minor details began to form a web of evidence connecting Turner directly to the crime scene. The locket, the hoodie fibers, the fingerprints, and the timeline all converged to form a compelling narrative. Tom Lawson continued to play a critical role in the investigation. Though he was not trained in law enforcement, his observations and recollections from the dream provided insights that might have otherwise been overlooked. He recalled minor details about Emily's habits, her meticulous organization, and the layout of her apartment that helped investigators pinpoint where Turner's actions had left traces. Tom's participation added a human element to the investigation, bridging the gap between evidence and intuition. As the pieces fell into place, Harrow scheduled a final review of all collected evidence. The goal was to ensure that every link was documented, every inconsistency addressed, and every piece of forensic, financial, and testimonial evidence aligned. The investigation had evolved from a simple murder case to a complex web of deception, manipulation, and calculated intent. Turner was no longer a suspect hiding behind a veil of respectability. He was a man whose motives, methods, and actions had been painstakingly uncovered through the convergence of luck, intuition, and relentless police work. In the midst of this, the town of Willow Creek began to sense a shift. Rumors circulated, whispers spread through coffee shops and community gatherings, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. People were beginning to realize that the person responsible for Emily Lawson's death might not be a stranger or a former lover, but someone they had trusted and admired for years. The thought was unsettling. It forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about appearances, trust, and the hidden darkness that could lurk behind a friendly smile. The final piece of the puzzle emerged when Harrow obtained Turner's phone records. They placed him near Emily's apartment on the night of the murder, contradicting his previously stated alibi. Coupled with the fingerprints, fibers, and timeline, the evidence formed a cohesive case that no defense could easily refute. Turner's careful planning, designed to mislead investigators, had been undone by the convergence of forensic science, human intuition, and the persistence of those unwilling to accept unanswered questions. By the end of the chapter, the story had shifted dramatically. Turner's public persona was no longer sufficient to shield him from scrutiny. Detective Harrow had methodically unraveled the web of deception, exposing the hidden connections between Turner and Emily's death. Tom Lawson's dream, once considered an unusual guide, had proven instrumental in identifying the key piece of evidence, the locket, that ultimately led them to Turner. The investigation had reached a tipping point. The town's collective fear, grief, and curiosity would soon be confronted with the truth, and the question of justice remained central to every discussion. Chapter 4 closed with a sense of impending resolution. The killer had been identified, the evidence compiled, and the narrative reconstructed. Emily's courage in documenting her findings, combined with Tom's intuition and Harrow's relentless pursuit of justice, had illuminated the path forward. Yet, the tension remained. Could they secure a conviction? Could they navigate the legal, social, and psychological obstacles to ensure Turner faced consequences for his actions? The answers would emerge in the next chapter, where the confrontation, confession, and closure would finally come to light. The investigation into Emily Lawson's murder had reached a critical point. After months of meticulous work, Detective James Harrow had pieced together the puzzle, identifying Matthew Turner, the town councilman, as the man behind the crime. Turner's polished image of respectability, his public appearances, and his influence within Willow Creek had made him seem untouchable. But the combination of forensic evidence, financial records, security footage, and Tom Lawson's dream had created an unbroken chain that led directly to him. Harrow knew that confronting Turner would be the most delicate and potentially dangerous stage of the investigation. He had to be precise, careful, and unflinching. One wrong move could allow Turner to manipulate the narrative, destroy evidence, or, worse, escape justice entirely. Harrow spent days planning the confrontation. He gathered the collected evidence in a secure room, reviewing each item carefully. The fingerprints on the box, the fibers from the hoodie, Turner's phone records placing him near Emily's apartment, the financial discrepancies, and the security footage. All of it was organized into a narrative that was indisputable. But beyond the technical evidence, Harrow also considered the psychological element. Turner was a man who had maintained control over every aspect of his life. Confronting him required strategy, understanding his temperament, and anticipating his responses. The detective prepared for every scenario, knowing Turner would try to deny, manipulate, or intimidate. Meanwhile, Tom Lawson struggled with his own emotions. The dream that had first guided him to the locket now felt heavier, almost prophetic. He could still recall every detail: the figure in the hoodie, the box in the cabinet, and the golden locket engraved with MT. It was as if Emily had reached across time and space to guide him. Tom had become an essential part of the investigation, but he could not shake the feeling that justice was only partially complete. The dream had revealed the path, but the final confrontation with Turner was necessary to bring closure. When the day of the confrontation arrived, Turner was summoned to the police station under the pretense of routine questioning. He arrived wearing a tailored suit, perfectly pressed, exuding the calm confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. His smile was practiced, his handshake firm, and his demeanor composed. Harrow observed him closely, noting every subtle gesture, the slight twitch in his fingers, the flicker of unease in his eyes. Turner attempted to project control, but beneath the surface, there was tension, a barely perceptible awareness that the walls were closing in. Harrow began methodically. He presented Turner with the evidence, one piece at a time, carefully explaining the significance of each detail. The fingerprints on the box matched Turner's, and fibers from the hoodie in the security footage corresponded to clothing he owned. Phone records placed him near Emily's apartment on the night of her murder. Financial records revealed transactions that aligned perfectly with Emily's notes about missing funds. Turner's composure began to crack, subtle at first, then increasingly pronounced as the detective continued to lay out the facts. Turner's initial response was denial. He claimed ignorance of the locket being in Emily's apartment, insisted that the fingerprints were planted, and suggested that someone else had manipulated the evidence. Harrow remained calm, countering each objection with factual, verifiable proof. The detective's approach was relentless but precise, leaving Turner no room for improvisation. With each new revelation, the veneer of invincibility that Turner had maintained for years began to crumble. Tom Lawson watched from the observation room, heart pounding. He felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The dream had guided them here, and now they were seeing the culmination of its impact. Turner, who had once seemed untouchable, was beginning to unravel. The man who had orchestrated Emily's murder with such calculated precision was now exposed, unable to hide behind his public persona. As the questioning continued, Turner's defenses weakened. His voice, once steady, began to falter. He shifted in his chair, avoided eye contact, and occasionally glanced toward the floor. Harrow pressed on, carefully reconstructing the night of the murder based on forensic evidence, financial motives, and witness statements. Each detail reinforced the narrative that Emily had uncovered Turner's embezzlement, had confronted him in her own quiet way, and had ultimately been silenced because of it. Turner realized that every lie, every attempt to manipulate perception, had been uncovered. Finally, under the weight of overwhelming evidence, Turner confessed. His voice was low, controlled at first, but tinged with the raw fear of a man whose carefully constructed life was collapsing. He admitted to planning the murder meticulously, ensuring there were no witnesses, and framing Mark Tyndall by placing the locket in the kitchen cabinet and wearing a hoodie similar to the one in security footage. Turner explained that Emily's investigations had threatened to expose his crimes, and in a moment of calculated desperation, he had chosen to eliminate the risk permanently. The confession sent a wave of relief through both Harrow and Tom. Justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. Turner had revealed not only the act of murder but also the intricate planning that had allowed him to maintain his facade for months. Harrow documented every detail, ensuring that the confession aligned perfectly with the forensic evidence and other corroborating material. This would be crucial for securing a conviction and preventing Turner from exploiting legal loopholes. With Turner's confession secured, the investigation moved toward closure. Legal proceedings were prepared, evidence was meticulously compiled, and the town of Willow Creek braced for the revelation that a trusted leader had committed a heinous crime. Harrow worked closely with prosecutors, ensuring that the case against Turner was airtight. There could be no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for Turner to evade accountability. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every detail of the confession was woven together into a comprehensive narrative that left no question about his guilt. For Tom Lawson, the resolution was deeply personal. The dream that had guided him to the locket had not only identified the key piece of evidence but had also ensured that Emily's murder would not remain unsolved. Tom reflected on the emotional journey of the past months, the fear, the grief, the sleepless nights, and realized that his connection to Emily had been instrumental in bringing her killer to justice. He could not explain how or why the dream had been so precise, but he understood its significance. It had been a bridge between tragedy and resolution, intuition and reality, the subconscious and the tangible. The town of Willow Creek slowly began to process the revelation. News of Turner's involvement spread like wildfire, shocking residents and sparking a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and sorrow. People struggled to reconcile the image of a respected councilman with the actions of a cold-blooded murderer. Families who had trusted Turner were forced to confront the unsettling reality that appearances could be deceiving and that evil could hide behind the most familiar faces. Public hearings were held, and the community gathered to seek answers. Harrow presented the evidence, the confession, and the narrative of the investigation, carefully explaining how Turner had been identified and apprehended. The clarity and thoroughness of the presentation left little doubt in anyone's mind. Turner's charm, influence, and status could no longer shield him. Justice, long delayed, was now visible, undeniable, and inescapable. The legal process proceeded swiftly. Turner faced trial, and the evidence compiled by Harrow's team, combined with his own confession, ensured a conviction. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought closure, but it also left lingering questions about the nature of trust, deception, and human behavior. How many times had Turner's charm allowed him to manipulate others without consequence? How many secrets had he buried beneath his polished exterior? Willow Creek would never see him the same way again. For Tom and Emily's family, the resolution brought a mix of relief and grief. Emily's death had been tragic, her life cut short in a manner both violent and calculated. Yet the justice served provided a sense of closure, a recognition of her courage, and a validation of her pursuit of truth. Tom felt a deep sense of connection to his sister, believing that somehow, through the dream, Emily had guided him to ensure that justice prevailed. While he could never bring her back, he could honor her memory by acknowledging her role in uncovering the truth and by cherishing the resilience she had shown in documenting her discoveries. Detective Harrow reflected on the case with a rare sense of humility. He had relied on experience, intuition, and methodical investigation to uncover the truth, but he also recognized the extraordinary role that Tom's dream had played. Whether it was coincidence, subconscious insight, or something beyond explanation, it had provided a breakthrough that might have otherwise remained elusive. Harrow noted in his report that sometimes, investigations required more than evidence and procedure. They required insight, patience, and the courage to follow even the most unusual leads. In the months that followed, Willow Creek slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The streets were quiet once again, the community gatherings resumed, and families began to feel safe in their homes. Yet the memory of Emily Lawson's murder, and the extraordinary circumstances that led to its resolution lingered in the town's collective consciousness. The story of the dream, the locket, and the unraveling of Turner's carefully constructed life became a legend, a reminder of the unexpected ways justice can manifest. Tom Lawson continued to live with the memory of the dream, reflecting on its impact and significance. While he could not fully explain its origin, he understood its purpose. The dream had bridged the gap between tragedy and resolution, guiding him to uncover evidence, connect the dots, and ultimately ensure that Emily's death did not go unanswered. It had been both a mystery and a lifeline, a phenomenon that defied logic but had tangible, profound consequences. For the residents of Willow Creek, the story served as both cautionary tale and source of reflection. It demonstrated that evil could hide behind familiar faces, that appearances could deceive, and that the pursuit of truth often required perseverance, courage, and sometimes, an openness to the inexplicable. Emily Lawson's murder was tragic, but its resolution provided a measure of justice and reaffirmed the resilience of those who sought the truth, even in the darkest circumstances. As Chapter 5 closes, the case of Emily Lawson reaches its conclusion. Matthew Turner is imprisoned, the town begins to heal, and the dream that first guided Tom Lawson becomes a lasting symbol of hope, intuition, and the power of persistence. The story reminds viewers that justice can emerge in the most unexpected ways, that truth can be uncovered through diligence, courage, and sometimes, the mysterious workings of the mind. The murder that once seemed unsolvable is now a testament to human determination, the bonds of family, and the extraordinary events that can bring hidden truths to light. The final thought lingers in the minds of those who followed the story. Sometimes, the answers we seek do not come from evidence alone. Sometimes, they come from dreams, instincts, and the quiet whispers of intuition that refuse to be ignored. Emily Lawson's life was tragically cut short, but her death became the catalyst for justice, guided by a dream that proved even the most enigmatic clues can reveal the truth.